Or speak to me.
Well, James Soane. James, I can speak to you.
He was talking that question. He bet when he did.
What are we waiting for?
I can hear background.
From these people though.
Yeah. Speak again.
Hey everyone, welcome to my lecture. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. And you're going to have the best time of your life. So Jason, I've just always thought you're a rather wonderful guy. I really like the way that you wear your t-shirts and the way you take a hand. Is that okay? So we're ready to kick off. So can you give me, if I start speaking, is it live? Will you just tell me when I'm going live? Are we ready? Let's say prayer. Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to my leaving lecture being broadcast live, we hope, from Soho House in Dean Street, the tremendously glamorous location. The London School of Architecture started in a members club in Soho, so it's fitting that for me it will end in a members club in Soho. Tonight, I'm really glad to see some people here in the room with me. I'm really sorry that everyone can't be in the room, and I hope some people are watching online and that you feel involved and can ask some questions later. The title of the talk is A New School for a New Century. Founding the LSA has been a decade-long project for me, so this is quite a significant and indeed emotional sign-off. So if I start crying later, please do forgive me. It's just I'm very in touch with my emotions. Part 1, covering 2010 to 2015, was written as an article in the latest issue of Citizen, which you can access online at citizenmag.org. Tonight is Part 2, Startup to Scale Up, covering 2015 to 2021. By now, I've done many talks on the LSA, but they've all essentially been about the future and about seeking to excite people to become part of that future. Tonight I'd like to do something different by looking at what we set out to do and reflecting on what we've collectively achieved. And at this transitional moment for the school, I would also like to share my hopes for the future. The real beginning of tonight's talk is these brilliant founding students who came to us in October 2015 and kicked off this incredible journey that we've all been on. However, the instigator for the school was 2010's tuition fee increase and the worry that talented students with limited means would be unable to study architecture. Alongside the financial issues, there was also the concern that some architecture schools were focused on fantasy form making, and we're really looking for a model that can make maximum impact with minimum means. We wanted a school that was much more engaged with how the world was changing. We felt the urgency of climate change, and we were the first school in the UK to formally adopt the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for design projects. I was also influenced by Peter Buchanan's point of epochal change that he identified. He set out a series of paradigm shifts from separation to connection, doing to being, functional device to cultural artifact, object building to urban fabric, appearance to experience, concept to craft, competition to collaboration, planet as resource to planet as partner. These paradigm shifts have been absolutely fundamental to the teaching at the school. In 2010, this was the first drawing I did of the school, showing people sat around a table talking, and that's how we began, and it seems to be how we will end this evening. A key idea that was that we wanted to be a network and not a hierarchy, to be about centre and periphery, not top and bottom. We didn't want the school to be seen as separate from or even oppositional to practice, as many schools are. A founding principle was that the school set up as a professional network model of education. The faculty and the students are embedded within and drawn from the architectural profession. Within the profession, we established a practice network to underpin the delivery of the programme. And beyond the architectural profession, we've engaged with all the actors who are shaping the city. Another founding principle was the use of the city of campus. We're light on physical infrastructure and look to London to provide the resources, creative, intellectual and spatial, that we need. We use a different borough each year as the site for all the design projects. We're definitely not a university. We're not a big institution where research occupies a higher status than teaching, where knowledge is produced by academics and then trickles down into the taught programmes. Our school uses the knowledge base of our professional network to bring expertise into the school. Reciprocally, the knowledge production that takes place within the school feeds back out into that professional network. This was the first drawing I did of the school that tried to capture its richness, with the content of the courses overlaid with the fabric of the city. And as Richard Sennett says, the city is the place that unites complex forms of knowledge. We set 5 values when we set up the school. We didn't have any students, we didn't have any work, but we needed to set some ideas that people could buy into. We called them the prime values as an acronym, so propositional, because as an architect, you cannot simply critique. You've got to combine the critique and the proposal and offer a vision and offer leadership. Relevant, because we must be engaged with the dramatic changes taking place in the world and shape the spatial implications of those changes. Innovative, because architectural culture must move forward and because the world needs innovations to happen at an increasingly exponential rate. And finally, we are, or at least were, metropolitan. With half of humanity living in cities, that has been our focus. But now I'd say that perhaps we should be looking outside of cities. COVID has changed the way we wish to live and work. There is also increasing pressure to level up across the country. Our horizons should broaden. So if the school's future leaders drop metropolitan, the prime values could become RIPE as an acronym, which has a certain fruity aptness. The school embarked on a vision that our vision is that people living in cities experience more fulfilled and more sustainable lives. Our school seeks to educate future leaders to design innovations that contribute to that change. To understand this, we built a theory of change. There are certain inputs from students, practice network, faculty, founders, physical resources, enablers, University of Liverpool validation, professional body recognition, Office for Students registration. All those 3 things together mean that our students can be on a recognised course and access state finance to support themselves. Activities, the Part 2 programme, access and participation, collective peer development and Citizen magazine. The outcomes, we have graduates in design research, and both of those things are destined for the architectural profession and an adjacent discipline. And we tell our students, please go to where you think you will make the most impact. So to just introduce a few of the new things that we've been working on, access and participation has been on the blocks for a couple of years. The main goal of it is that by 2030, we have a student body that is 50% from the lowest participation neighbourhoods and 50% BAME students. And we aim to do that by 2030. Certainly delivering academic programme, we discovered, much to my horror, is in a high regulation, low profitability zone. I've been looking at ways that we could look at high profitability, low regulation zone. And so we looked at collective peer development. CPD is somewhat unbelievably an unregulated market by the RIBA. So we've looked at reinventing CPD as a professional network where our practice networks share their insights with each other and create a rich community that develops along with the school. We've also launched Citizen, which is a magazine for everybody engaged with shaping the future city. And we want this to establish a global network of people who engage with our mission. Because we're not a university and we are a startup, we wanted to innovate not just in the programme, but actually in the organisation itself. So I flirted briefly with the notion of heterarchy, which probably many of you don't know, but it turned to be a bit of a spider's web that confused everybody, especially when you put in the collaboration lines and no one knew what the hell they were doing. So I looked at collaboration and the evolution of collaboration, because that's what we're all about. And starting at the bottom, wolf pack. The key advances, division of labour, command authority, up to army, formal roles, scalable hierarchies, machine, innovation, accountability, meritocracy, up to family, empowerment, stakeholder model, and then right at the top, living organism, self-management, wholeness, evolutionary purpose. Now, I wouldn't remotely claim that we've managed to become a living organism yet, and I would certainly admit, and probably other people would tell you, that we've at times moved up and down between the wolf pack and the family and all of them in between. But the greatest aspiration I have is that we do end up as a living organism. And that means that we can organise ourselves as a holarchy, which is a series of nested relationships that transcend and include the lower level. So the four parts of this are talent, programme, network and organisation. And ever the architect, I imagine those things as four pillars that support and underpin the vision and deliver the vision. So each pillar has a purpose. So talent, diverse students are recruited from across the whole of society and supported to achieve their potential. Programme, students and practitioners are educated with the knowledge, skills and behaviours to design and practice in an emerging era. Organisation, the school becomes this living organism where staff have the structure and freedom to innovate in alignment with our evolutionary purpose, and network of wide communities engaged and informed and inspired, and professional partnerships support our development. And then each of those pillars has a series of roles attached to it. So we've tried to write each role also to have a purpose to support all the pillars. So for me as an example, I would be, let's say, a growth champion in talent and a fundraiser in chief in network. And the idea is that this is a very scalable model of organisation where everyone understands their purpose and everybody is chief executive of their own role. Even the students, that's the great dream, that you are chief executive of the role that you're in. The students have been the biggest co-creators of the school, and it's really important they feel ownership of how it develops. So how do we measure these things, the impact of these pillars? So in talent, we're looking for a new generation discovering architecture, increased social mobility, widened access to the profession, a greater pool of talent and cultural perspectives, improving the quality of the built environment. Student mental health supported to achieve success, and graduates maximise their growth. In programme, we want graduates to have successful careers, a purpose-driven, impact-focused design approach, improving the quality of the built environment, and a generation of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs making change. A new ethical framework leads to better decision-making during the design and construction process, and sustainability, a key objective, becomes integral to design thinking, both as a technical requirement and as a new vision for how we live on the planet. In organisation, that we're financially sustainable, that we're empowered staff to innovate, that we have success in all our regulation, that staff want to grow with the school, and that high staff morale, happy staff leads to happy students. In network, that we want philanthropists to be able to deliver their own objectives by supporting our objectives, that we want an engaged network to learn with us, that we want partners who wish to connect with us in our purpose, and that we want citizens to create this international network. And so how do we measure success in this? Not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured, but we do think that certain parts of our pillars can be measured. So for talent, application numbers, student numbers, access targets, progression rates, graduate destinations. In programme, critical self-reflection, external examiners, employee feedback, press, organisation, new launches, staff morale and retention, success with regulators, robust governance, sensible evaluation of risk, impeccable record keeping. And I would gladly show you my records to show that we have achieved that. Network, size and quality of the practice network, membership fee revenue, number of partners, partnership revenue, level of financial reserves, citizen readership. These are the things that anyone should be measuring the school on in future years. So how have we done in the first 6 years? What have we done together? What have we achieved? In talent, we've got 57 students, 57 staff, 100 students and 127 alumni. We've grown from 149 applications in 2015 to 230 in 2021. We've grown from 31 students in our first year to 75 students joining next year. Next year we've got 55% female students, 40% BAME students. Sadly, we're behind in the lowest participation neighbourhoods, and that's something I hope the school will focus on in the future. And progression rate, pretty much 100% employment. So any students here, you're pretty much guaranteed of a career in the future of architecture. These are all the people who've been involved in our school. I'm now going to read them out one by one. No, not really, but look for your name. It's in there somewhere, I'm sure. And then programme, I'm going to read this out from Jamie Faber, our external examiner, who says that since its inception, the emphasis of the LSA's programme is on the individual architect's journey towards their own vision for the city. The breadth of investigations undertaken by the students and the variety of analysis and representation produced speaks clearly of the presence of the individual student in the decision-making process, but it also is a testament to the quality of the teaching staff and their commitment to the school and its aims. He goes on, I admire students who took on social, political, as well as environmental issues and made proposals that had the potential to cause a shift in perspective. The best projects encompassed everything from the practical, such as procurement strategies, to the poetic, such as new city rituals. A number of examples of extraordinary drawings took the meticulous work and transformed it into a set of emotive and passionate visions of what life in the city should be, simultaneously critical and whimsical. Kester Rattenbury, our other external, says a healthy school, a healthy and confident school with articulate and self-motivated students and lively and committed staff, which has travelled a long way in a short time span and which seems to have a good attitude to progressing further. The LSA is an unusual and still evolving aim to support each student to make a central thesis, where the student cumulatively sets out, develops and tests their own individual design approach through both case studies, historical precedent, propositional statements and strategies, and final, highly detailed design proposals. This is an extremely educational premise, and some elements of it, notably the group design think tank element, are really distinctive and valuable. So to have this from our externals is just fantastic endorsement of what we've been doing. Paul Finch in the press says innovation and high standards are perfectly compatible, as the story of the LSA shows. The proposition of education training in a form of pupillage has taken root, showing how beneficial change can be achieved. And finally, the most important thing, graduates. One says, I've learned an incredible amount about the city and feel that I've been given the necessary tools to not just be an architect, but a city shaper and a change maker. In organisation, we've launched several new things. Staff morale, I would say, has generally been pretty high. It's had its ups and downs, but generally pretty high and in line with our purpose. Our regulators, every first gateway to our regulatory success, every first opportunity we've had, we have succeeded with every regulator, from University of Liverpool, ARB, REBA, QAA, HEFKI, OFS, HASA, Department of Education. It's quite a thing for a new school to achieve everything first time. It's a huge testament to the ops team and specifically Stephanie Rice. Network, what we've achieved, 180 practices and counting, a huge leap from 30 in our first year. Key partners like Stanhope Savills, Kingspan, Tata Steel, Arup Drawing Matter, key shapers of the city. The partner network's also brought in 50,000 in its first 6 months. We've raised nearly £1 million in donations since we started. Financial reserves are 3 months running costs. Financially, we're in relatively good condition. Collective peer development that Jason's been leading on, 25 CPDs since launch, 2,000 RSVPs, 60 people on average for attendance. This is a really great new initiative that Jason's done, and it's really beginning to bring the practice network in more and more. And the practice network is these 180 people. I'm so grateful for the practices for taking part in our school and making this happen. And some of Jason's lectures, from the 15-minute city appraise to how to grow your studio to sustainability through office retrofits, through to what rewilding the city really looks like, collaborative working between small and large practices. These are really fantastic weekly events for anyone in the profession of architecture to enrich themselves, and I'd encourage everyone to come along to one of them. We've had 4 issues of Citizen. It was set out to be a quarterly. It's been a more erratic publishing thing, but it keeps you surprised. 2 of them, like buses, came along at once last week on our new shiny website designed by Simon Esterson. So I really hope you delve deep onto the website and discover all the content. There's some brilliant content on there. And the city as campus. So this has been one of our key foundational principles. How do we deliver on it? Well, I have to tell you, we delivered on it brilliantly. Every year we've moved to a different borough. We've looked at a different borough each year. We've moved from St. James Street in 2014 to Second Home in 2015, the great environs of Somerset House in 2016. Onto Mare Street. This is a big moment for us where we finally got our name above the door. The slight disadvantage of it was that late at night there were a number of flashes who scared some of the students. But that's Hackney for you. We are in the city, and that's life. We got some curtains, but they didn't quite veil out everything. Anyway, so then we've moved to this wonderful place, 6 Orsman Road by British Land. British Land has been a fantastic supporter and given us this space that's going to allow tremendous growth. This is some of my key collaborators sat on this amazing roof terrace, and I really hope that this will allow the school to grow over the next few years. I'm very grateful to British Land for their generosity. The practice network has been spread all the way across London. We've used all of their resources to deliver the programme. So Roger Stirk Harbour has given us a studio at the weekends. We've done workshops with Allies and Morrison. We've done reviews at Karakusevich Castle. People must think we work there the amount of times we're in there. We've done a symposium at Minotti, the Italian furniture company. We've had a public lecture at the series at the Royal Academy, but we've also held public lectures in the pub next door to the studio. Nigel Coates and Adam Nathaniel Thurman talking about style. Instead of going on expensive study trips, we've looked at buildings in London. Foster and Partners has shown us around Bloomberg HQ. We go to building visits very often. We did before the pandemic. James Soane hosted High Table at his flat, with dinner at his flat. As a gallery, we've used the Rocker Gallery for an exhibition and discussion. We use John McCaslin and Partners every year for our annual Christmas show. And at graduation, we used Bistro Tech for our annual graduation to be part of Hackney. It's been many great events. This is our first graduating cohort. The other thing we've used is tools to make the school happen. We had a think tank called Emerging Tools, a slightly unfortunate title which I gave them, sadly. But they came up with a drawing that was looking at all the tools that they used to make their life at the LSA work. 10 years ago, most of those tools didn't exist. And increasingly, particularly in the pandemic, we've been using WhatsApp for student forums to find out what's been going on, to have a bit of a gossip. Inevitably with Zoom, there's been lots of Zoom going on. I've managed to pick a photo here where it looks like half the people at least want to kill themselves. But I assure you, it was actually a great meeting. Many things we discovered can be done quite well across Zoom. Some things not so well. Design teaching is pretty hard, but I think there's a real opportunity for what we can do online. Practice in academia. So we've had 180 practices. They offer work placements to students 3 days a week. They've been highly engaged in all aspects of the programme. And they not only offer placements, but they take part in the delivery of the programme and the creation of content. On the first day of term each year, I ask students 3 questions. What change do you want to see in the world? How does your architecture contribute to that change? And who do you want to be as a designer? And they're really important questions. They feed through everything we do. They produce a continuous design portfolio that moves from cities to strategies to the think tank, and then a personal project, direction, history, speculation, thesis, synthesis, and tectonic. They produce 2 pieces of writing, a manifesto and a manual. The manual is about the practice that they're in their placement, and the manifesto is about a practice they might like to be in the future. So where are you trying to get to, and what's your route to trying to get there? For assessment, we're really keen that students don't produce work that is to please their tutor or to please the school. It should be work that can have resonance outside of the school. So for our assessment criteria, we look at 3 things: the intention, how relevant and how ambitious are the issues you're addressing, how clearly articulated and worthwhile are the goals, synthesis, how well have the issues and goals been realised as a spatial proposal, to what degree has complexity been resolved into an integrated whole, and then impact, the key one: what potential level of change would your realised proposal make, and to what extent does your proposal break new ground in architectural culture? We also looked at this idea from business schools that actually we set up the LSA to address a certain number of issues, and that when a problem's in front of you and huge over your head and you don't know what to do, it can feel really overwhelming. But if you set the desired outcome and think about where you want to get to, immediately that problem becomes smaller. And then you look at a projected backstory: where have we come from, so how can we get to the next bit, and think, what is that next little step we need to take? And particularly in agile working, so not a plan-driven approach, but an agile approach, what is the next step, I think, has been the most important question I've asked throughout the whole of the LSA, because it's too difficult to plan too far ahead. You've got to be able to adapt on your feet. This has certainly been an approach that we've used with students in their design projects. We've tried to differentiate between incremental innovation, which is one little step forward, to disruptive innovation, which is the great game-changing leap forward. And then I looked at the tech sphere to a definition of innovation. The best and maybe the only real direct measure of innovation is change in human behaviour. And I think, at its most profound, architecture is human ritual spatialised. And our projects that the school produces can actually provide an armature for these changing behaviours and connections for how people live on the planet. Design think tanks, we really do a lot of collaboration, and we've definitely used it as one of our main tools. Every year at the start of term, students tell us their Myers-Briggs. Diana Rice, who's our well-being coach, who sadly can't be here tonight, does a Belbin workshop so that students can articulate not just what their strengths might be in the group and what they want to offer the group, but actually what they want to receive from their peers as well, so it becomes a reciprocal relationship. The first think tank I worked on was called EDGY, Ethical Dwellings for Generation Y. We looked at the habits, customs and rituals of people from the millennial generation and how they might want to live in the future. This became a kind of hierarchy of sharing from the most private to the most public. And this became a spatial armature that then informed the scale of an urban block that was then built through modern methods of construction and created a new space for living. We've also had many interesting ideas, and I'm sorry I can't go through all of them, but just some as an example. Unstable City looked at using volatility as a way to create a master plan. Swarm looked at new technologies and how you could connect them to connect people, professionals and place to proactively change the planning system. Spatial Health Network flipped NHS on its head, so that instead of it being about curing things, it was about preventing things, and looked at key health challenges for the borough and how architecture could help alleviate them. The Civic Station was a new type of transport infrastructure for the public good. Assemble looked at how humans and non-humans could be reconciled and live in harmony in quite a conceptual project. Adaptive Typology looked at the post-retail high street and a new ecology for it. The Last Act was looking at what happens beyond religion in a high-density metropolis where you can't bury people anymore. How can you sustainably get rid of our loved ones? Architectural Agency looked at combining education and training to inform a new regenerative master plan. Homesteading the city was the idea of both production of food and consumption of food and the enjoyment and celebration of food in an urban condition. Floating Exchange was about creating a new living typology on the rivers and on the canals around the city. And the Last Mile was looking at too many delivery drivers around London and how much they ruin the city, and how can we make a new infrastructure that would allow the city to become more social. James Soane's done some amazing critical practice manuals that have been really excellent ways for students to engage with where they want to be going to. Alan Powers has been leading on the community of practice and history and looking at students really where they want to place their work historically so that their work has richness and depth. And then some student projects. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I'm delighted to show Chiara, who's sat in one of her projects. Chiara, over to you. Tell me a bit about it. Chiara was looking at stitching back into the city and creating different workspaces that was really trying to create an urban fringe of creativity on the edge of the city. Dan Lee had a very personal exploration that was layering up infrastructure on the top of a train station to create cultural infrastructure. Raf was looking at a vision for Oxford Street, I think a more compelling vision than the one we've seen in the last week or so. I hope it's not designed by one of our practice network, but I think it's a very exciting proposal from Raf that I think would be judicious for people to follow. Alex looked at Wastminster, the problem of food waste, and he looked at reappropriating a car park in Soho and how that could become a centre for a micro centre for reusing food waste, both to educate but also to consume it. Charlotte also looked at stitching into the city, creating a live-work typology. Claire had a really interesting project that she was interested in densifying the city and looking at backland sites within Islington and creating a sort of garden community that was collective housing that could really densify and diversify the city. Hannah Bowers looked at the Museum of London and how closed it is and taking a very different approach to reusing buildings that was kind of cutting into the existing fabric and connecting it back into the city in these very beautiful drawings and sections. Robin Chatwin wanted to celebrate what public architecture could be. He was depressed by municipal architecture, as anyone would be, and thought about the great ideals of public provision and how they could be celebrated through a new building that was much more generous and open. Annecy was looking at two unobvious communities of churchgoers and creative community, both of whom are fairly vulnerable but had very similar needs. So she created a community for them under a viaduct where they shared spaces, and it was about these thresholds and changes of condition. It was a very beautiful and clever project. Will Bellamy was looking at Tate & Lyle's sugar factory and how you could, instead of making it a very boring housing development, offer something that was rich and cultural and unique and kept the character of the industrial architecture. Maylis wanted to look at the city and how you could really connect with nature and create a housing that was much more a mixture of landscape and housing meshed together. Tom was interested in the idea that cars won't be in the city much longer and that we could reuse that space for public provision, for social cities. He created a grid across the city that could be plug and played into to create all different sorts of provision. Lucy Steeden, also interested in generating a city that for a housing estate that was much more ecological and really about a vision for a city where you could connect with nature and that it was almost like regrowing a housing typology. Jamie Sudra was looking at densifying an existing estate and creating a matte architecture with solid and void that created these spaces for communities. Dan, who's also here tonight, was looking at ecology and cities and how that we can create new rituals that allowed you to not just be sustainable, but live in a sustainable way and feel you were living in a sustainable way. And Nancy also was interested in that actually the provision of housing doesn't allow families to change or grow. She wanted to create a framework out of timber that allowed a very ecological and flexible architecture. Jack from this year was looking at existing housing estates and using a framework that was very simple but that could be used to make public programme that was adaptable and changeable and cheap and deliverable, and he's in discussion with Hackney Council at the moment to see if he can make the project a reality. Yav, with beautiful drawing skills, was looking at work homes and density and how living and working could be much more meshed together to intensify the city in Hackney. Piotr was interested in creating a network to reuse waste, to get a zero waste city. So like the churches, cathedrals and churches, he was looking at different scales of infrastructure that allow people to upcycle their waste so that Hackney becomes zero waste. And then Callum's final project was really looking at a city and what you could do with an existing housing estate. A very beautiful project that really began to think about, now that we're living and working in different ways, how can you move work out of the home and put it into the slack spaces in an estate? And how this can make different conditions at day and night and a much more collective public social sphere. So the future. Sorry, losing my voice. I'll have to wait. I mean, one of my great hopes is that we're moving from start-up to scale-up, and that actually, as we've been smaller, all relationships have been mediated through the middle, and often it's felt like they've been mediated through me, Steph, and Jason. So what we're hoping about, as we get bigger, that the network starts to communicate with each other much, much more. And that we can offer all different things to help reach our vision, from an architect's earliest stages, encouraging them in school, all the way up from 1, 2, 3, collective peer development, all the way through to professional development, and that actually we want to be the school that is at the centre of changing that career journey for architects. And then a part 1 programme has been written and drafted and imagined. It's been handed over to my successors for their take on it and for their conceptualisation. I'm sure they will want to change it quite a bit, but I'm going to say where it's currently up to. I think I was really keen that any new course learnt from the part 2 programme and actually began to build on the knowledge that we've built up already from the part 2. So where the vision for the part 2 was that people living in cities experience more fulfilled and sustainable lives, I think we should be looking much more broadly at towns and rural communities. Rather than city as campus, looking at country as campus. Instead of projects based within London, that they're based all across the country. Instead of students going to the LSA goes to students. I think it's really important if we're trying to reach students from the lowest participation neighbourhoods, that we don't expect them to move to one of the world's most expensive cities in their first couple of years, and that we try and find a way to have a dispersed network around the country. The practice network currently comprises 180 practices in London. Perhaps by 2025 it could be 1,000 practices around the country. Practice support, in part 2 they offer integrated work placements. Perhaps in part 1 they could offer a working environment including a desk and printing facilities so that students get inculcated into what life in an office might be like. For both part 2 and part 1, I think practices should provide a mentor to the students. The model for part 2 is that first year students are in an integrated work placement and second year they're based in the studio. We're looking at an accelerated degree for part 2, and the idea is that you deliver the same amount of programme instead of in 3 years, in 2 years. So in financial terms, students in the part 2 are supported by a salary from their placement. We hope that an accelerated degree they save about £5,000 in tuition fees, but also a year's accommodation, a year's living and travel costs, and they enter employment a year earlier. So the questions that we ask, the 3 questions, are at quite a mature level for part 2, but for part 1 they could really lead into it. So instead of what change do you want to see in the world, what change does the world need? How can your architecture contribute to that change? Could be how can architecture contribute to those changes? And instead of who do you want to be as a designer, what role can you play as a designer? So just to run through it, instead of the clarity of it is that it's the same taught programme but delivered in 2 years. We've taken quite a simple structure for the armature for it: live, work and play, mixed use, reuse and new build. But there's actually considerable depth. We've been looking at Peter Buchanan's integral framework that maps all of human knowledge into a series of quadrants, and we've been looking to try and teach architecture in a very synthetic way, because if you're going to truncate the course, the opportunities for more synthetic learning become really important. And so we move from private life, public life, integrated to emerging life. And then just as an example for integrated living, we've tried to balance the subjective and the objective and teach them all in one project. So instead of history being separate and technology being separate and theory being separate, everything's taught within the studio so that students know how to apply that knowledge. So the difference between dwelling and house, experiential, and functional relationships, sensual dimensions of comfort, technological provision of comfort, psychic well-being, physical well-being, meaningful rituals versus domestic functions, emotional shelter versus physical shelter. And I think for architects to think about these things in the round is a very rewarding way to try and learn what architecture is. And then on to the students. Really the great hope for the school is that the students go on to be the brilliant change makers that we hope. So just taking as an example among many, this was taken before we started the school, everyone looking fresh-faced. Alex and Alex are here, they're looking fresh. Alex got his cheeky lean in the back there, onto Tim. 2 years later, slightly more grizzled, but still lovely people. This is what we've done to them. They've learned much more knowledge. They went to work in Will Alsop's office. Will gave them a studio space. They were there for a couple of years. They could use all of his resources. Will was a great supporter of the school. They've used the intellectual resources of the school. This is a group of people from our network going for crits and reviews at their office. They've got most of their work in the early days from the school, either from the LSA directly or from their tutors. And we've been a great supporter of them, and we really want them to succeed in their practice. So they set up Studio Eightfold as a practice in their final year, which we call the Proto Practice Year. And Alex's project about Westminster has actually started to turn into real projects. So the Evening Standard ran a campaign that Alex wrote, a 3-week campaign to try and get people in London to think about it differently. They were then asked to do a London Design Festival exhibition. That then led to Isabel at Citizen inviting them to Seoul to exhibit alongside H&M and Foster and Partners, to get a fantastic international platform to their project. And then recently they came third in an international competition to build a new waste centre. Third. I mean, that's amazing for students who are 2 years out of school. So yeah, to recap, I hope we move from the kind of capital city to a kind of national network. And my final thought is a founder's statement. Simon Alford convinced me I should write a founder's statement, which I hope he was being serious. Anyway, I've taken him seriously and I've done it. So I'm just going to, it's my first draft of it and probably it will be the last. So the LSA was established as a design school to address the challenges and opportunities of its times. We use design to participate in the evolution of how we live on the planet, envisioning environments in which humanity will flourish. The school belongs to all those co-creating it at any given time. For every year the school exists, may its co-creators ask, what does the world need in a design school right now? And may the pioneering spirit of its founders animate successive generations in the perpetual pursuit of the answer. Thank you very much. Cheers. So Samantha, now we've got a little Q&A.
We do. I think I'm supposed to put a gadget on. Do I need a gadget? I want my glass of water as well.
Would you ask them to bring me a gin and tonic?
Yeah, sure.
Quite strange to be standing up in
Hi.
this setup, but we'll look very relaxed. And given that you've just given a phenomenal talk, and you did say something about it's not an end, and I hope it's not the end. It might be for this particular little phase, but certainly not in the big picture. So that's just needs to be said, I think.
Definitely not an end.
But thank you very much, Will. That was an amazing, high speed, highly energetic, didn't expect anything less from you. A sort of survey of what is the LSA, and I mean, first of all, I just have to say, and I think everybody would want to say congratulations.
Well, thank
an extraordinary
everybody
achievement.
here.
And thank everybody here. I feel like an absolute gatecrasher and a latecomer. I gave you a ring probably exactly a year ago today saying, well, what's going on at the LSA? And thinking, I haven't really thought about that school at all because I was busy thinking about another school.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, they must be going places now. I wonder what's going on. And you said, oh yeah, we're doing some stuff. And so it's been an extraordinary, and you were very, very generous to say, well, come on in and have see what's going on. So I have had the most amazing year getting to know your school, our school, I can proudly say now, which was, I had, if it is, but one thing is very certain, one cannot predict the future, you don't know where you're going, and I could not have said a year ago this day that I would be having this conversation with you here, with all of you, so I am unbelievably delighted. And I think it is a testament to how you have welcomed so many people into this organisation and so quickly, and achieved so much. It is a Q&A, so I'm supposed to ask some questions now, except for gushing kind of praise.
Yeah,
really.
I'm just to my voice.
So I'm going to ask about you for a moment. If you hadn't done this, what on earth would you have done? What was the moment when you thought, okay, I'm going to take this on?
Well, I didn't think it would be that hard. I think the naivety of it was the main thing. Because I was teaching at the RCA at the time, and it's like, well, how hard can this be? It's like you need a printer and some good coffee. And, so I think the naivety was the main driving force of thinking you do. And then once you're in it, and then you can't really get off it.
Too late.
So I made it public deliberately, wrote about it publicly to force me to do it. And it was my New Year's resolution in 2011. And it's the only one I've ever kept. And I still don't have a six-pack, but that was fun.
Something can't have everything.
You can't have everything.
All at once.
It's good to have one thing on your New Year's resolution every year.
But so there was a moment when you graduated from studying architecture to thinking, actually, no, I'm more interested in...
I couldn't sit, so I wanted to practice, and then Fenella was my tutor, and it's almost like I'm blaming you for a bit. She was my tutor, I'm just looking at you. And by the end of it, I couldn't sit for more than like 60 seconds because of back problems. So there was no way I was going to work there was no way I could work in an architecture practice. So I worked for a magazine because you could run around a lot more. And then I had like a roll of bubble wrap I could lie on in the office that was eccentric, but they could kind of cope with it. And then, so it's been slightly aleatory, but good in the end.
But rather fortuitous.
Yeah. I think what was useful really about having to go into journalism was that you meet so many more people than you do in an office, that to start a school about practice and knowing already several hundred people, it became so much easier because it wasn't a standing start. It became easier to persuade people, and there was a platform to talk about it. Otherwise I think it would have been impossible.
So it was a very self-driven, but you have consistently talked throughout your talk about we.
Yeah.
And it is there is always a tension, isn't there, between the I and the we, because it takes the I just to get on with things and make things happen quite often, but you can never do that without the we. So I wonder, in those early days, what was the sort of really core of the support for that, or who did you kind of immediately...
Well, there was a real thing around pronouns to begin with, as is now very au courant. But I tried out we from really early on, and then people slightly rebuffed it a bit and kept going, oh, your new school. And I was like, our new school. And then it took a while for that to catch on. And then when it did, people really began to take ownership of it and run with it. And that's fantastic, actually, because the more the school can't really belong to anyone. It has to belong to the people in it. So it's a kind of not gift, but it's something that is given away for people to then run with. Yeah. And hopefully they now say we, and I can say you.
Well, the other bit of maybe I'll come back to you again in a moment. But I was curious about, and also I have to say, I dare say there are a lot of questions brewing around the table, so please get them ready. But I just to jump now to the body of work, because those are those are the bits. I mean, I'm very interested in the whole organisation, but you explained it so clearly that, and I think there are some interesting moments there as well. But in terms of the work on the wall, ultimately, is the thing that we were always all brought up as designers and architects to say, well, that's it at the end of the day. At the end of the year, you've got the work on the wall, and that's what speaks about you. And now there is a body of work. When you started, there was no body of work. Did you know what to expect? Did you have an idea of what you might see? Or
well, certainly probably all the teachers here know, every time you set a brief, you never get what you think you're going to get. But in the surprises of the projects have been great, because I think because we were very clear what we put out into the world, I think we got the students who are interested in that, and then they've run with the agenda, and I think it's quite unique as a school, the amount in which it does engage with the city and actually is happy to stitch into the city and use buildings and not be, sort of highly formalist, but actually really think about what they can do as architects to make change. I think the body of work has begun to sort of demonstrate that.
And I would say that I hear a little hint of it now, and it always slightly belies your unbelievably sort of entirely positively driven view of where everything, the vision and the direction that everything has gone in. But there is a slight, and don't take this the wrong way, defensiveness in that attitude towards that the work is about in those stitching together.
Yeah.
And I think, if that is the one thing I have observed from the work, it is entirely sits in that realm of looking at London now and what kind of a city is it now, and that it has evolved, that we all know as a series of villages essentially, and then fields and the bits in between, and it sort of has evolved in that way, but never been strategized in that way necessarily. And I would say that the school has sort of taken that on as a strategy. Yeah, a lot influenced by Peter's thinking. But I think that's a very strategic move as opposed to a defensive one. Sorry, the rest of architecture, we only deal with the stitching in between bits.
I don't think it's all stitchy.
It's a great thing. It's potentially a fantastic thing because it's a very observant and very sensitive thing. So all I'm saying is really just, I think find a language for talking about it as a strategy towards the city, which is.
I think the students I don't think we promoted this idea of reusing existing buildings so much. I think that's really come from the students, and. I don't think it's anything we've particularly pushed. I think it's been something that has been generated in the student body, as far as I'm aware. So I think it's.
Would you say that's fair? You asked the students in the room, driven by, given some tools. That's where you found the place to work.
I certainly think Peter always does ask in all crits. What does this piece of city need? So, don't just be an object building, but look and see strategically what that could be.
So I suppose that's the question really then, isn't it? What does the city need?
Yeah.
And that being the relevant question to ask. But I think it's so obvious now as the work is beginning to build. So I think that's an incredible strength of the school. So again, if it's not what you expected, as you say, you never quite know what to expect. It's something really incredible to build on, I would say, as a foundation for the next part. The other bit that I think is interesting, a sort of strange absence of the word, and maybe it's one of the very early images you showed, and I was thinking, is he going to show any other images, architectural images at all? And you did, of course, because we looked at lots of great projects. But the one, again, sort of something that you were reacting to or responding to very early on was the form finding image, and that being sort of representative of a whole kind of a trajectory of architecture. And I guess I come from a place where that was entirely generated out of just an interest in technology and an interest in suddenly computing was with us, and it could do so much more than our brains could ever catch up with. So all we'll do is make patterns, because that's what we can do really fast. And I just wonder if you think that there isn't a role for, now that hopefully we're starting to move beyond that a bit, we're kind of becoming more digitally literate and educated, certainly as designers, whether there is a kind of role and a way that that can be incorporated into the design thinking.
I think it definitely should. I think you know, all these advanced technologies should be harnessed to produce something that has a meaningful impact. And if it's just for novelty's own sake, then I don't think that's particularly relevant. And especially at the moment when the world has so many issues to address, it feels frivolous and slightly dated. And to be honest, the idea that a lot of these films are radical, well, sorry, I've seen these films for 30 years because they've not really changed. So what actually was the point?
So I'm going to then ask you. So in a moment, no, I think it's your point is that it really is time that architecture in that sense absolutely moved on and understood what that.
Well, I mean, how it engages with climate and culture and all those things is really relevant, but used for that. Yeah. And also, if you're going to produce a building that's so parametric and unique that it costs a fortune, well, how is that a solution to many of, or even an idea for many of the bits of city that we need to build, or any of the sort of interesting projects? So I think technology should be more present in the school, could be more present, and I think is being introduced much more by Paolo, who's doing lots of workshops on it. But I don't think we'll ever end up competing with the AA, say, or places like that.
I don't know about that, but anyway, we'll see about that.
Well, I meant competing for that mantle.
Competing for that. No, well, no one's in.
Obviously, I want to crush them.
Not in for that kind of competition. No, we're into a different kind of design competition. So I guess that leads me to my next question, which is you're going to Harvard soon. Yeah. Which is very exciting, and Harvard have a very, very extraordinary lab, the MIT lab. So I suggest you go and have a look at that.
I'm very excited.
Some of your time to go there, because lots of that sort of design technology thinking is and still is happening there in quite a different way.
Well, it's very mapped to the city, isn't it?
It's very mapped to the city. So I look forward to getting reports back on that. So what are you planning to do when you're there? A
lot of the stuff is on kind of entrepreneurship that I'm looking at. I mean, the great joy of it is you don't have to produce anything, so they pay you to just go and think for a year. So that's just heaven.
It's like being at the LSA.
So I can't wait. And to really think of a new venture to start. So I don't know what that is, and it's not too I mean, Dan and I have been working on stuff this year, but I think we want to sort of test it a bit more and think of something. But I think, a charity project for 10 years is good, but I wouldn't mind making some money at some point in the future too.
That'll come in time. Amazing. Well, we wish you very well. I want to. Does anybody? I'm not quite sure how we're doing on time. Let's just check on time. Yes. Well, the question. Does anybody have questions? A question? Come on, you've all worked with the guy for 5 years. Thank you.
Advice to the new leadership in terms of the idea of this kind of notion of we, but also in terms of direction and how to sustain this momentum. What would be the word of advice you would hand over to them as something which is sacred, but also will kind of make the school grow in a way that you have envisaged?
Well, I think any new leader will want to do things in their own way, and that's natural. And every departing CEO thinks they've got exactly the right strategy, and that the other person should just follow that, and that never happens. So I think it's good for people to strike out in their own direction. I think what I try to do is be cheerful and try and lead from the front in terms of making optimism about where the school can go, and fabricate something from nothing. And have an energy to it that vibrates with a futurity that people want to engage with. So I think that point about not just critique but proposal and combining them is really important. And we are a design school, so everything, architecture is the nexus of all disciplines, as Peter say, but it's architecture that synthesizes all those things. So if it's not really going to be synthesized within that, it's very difficult to imagine how that that might work. So I think setting the vision, everyone will want to be led. Everyone is excited about where things might go. So I think it's about getting people excited about what that future might be and getting people behind it and doing it, because you can't, you actually can't lead the school without people wanting to go there. So I think the school has really been made by the students wanting to make the school, and that's what kind of makes it. So getting that excitement from students to make the project and make it afresh every year.
Thank you. Very good. Any other questions? No, you just all came for good dinner, didn't you? But all those who are not around the dinner table might have I don't know whether we're allowed to take online questions, and maybe we've run out of time anyway.
Well, we've got 1 minute apparently, so it gives me a chance just to sum up and say thank you to everybody here who's helped make the school. Thank you, I don't know which camera we're on, to everyone who might be watching it at home. It's been delightful to work with you all. I'm going to miss you forever, but hopefully I may come back. And I really hope that the school flourishes under your shared direction. And it's been a fantastic journey, and thank you so much. So a round of applause for all of you.